In the heart of every crisis lies a choice. Will you hold your ground, even as the odds stack higher and higher against you? Or will you falter, letting despair whisper that surrender is the only path? Throughout history, the greatest leaders have faced these moments of reckoning. For some, resolve turned the tide in their favor, forging legacies of triumph. For others, losing hope marked the beginning of the end, leaving behind stories of what might have been. The ancient world offers us powerful lessons. Leaders like Vercingetorix, Croesus, and Mithridates VI stood on the brink of disaster and made choices that forever shaped their destinies and the futures of their people. Their stories are warnings, etched into history, of the dangers of surrender and the steep price paid when hope is abandoned. Vercingetorix, a hero bound in chains. Picture this: a vast hilltop fortress surrounded on all sides, Roman siege engines looming like iron shadows under the darkening sky. Inside the walls of Alesia, Vercingetorix, the proud leader of the Gallic tribes, faces an impossible decision. Months earlier, he had inspired a fractured people to unite against the Roman invasion led by Julius Caesar. His early victories, like the triumph at Gergovia, sent shockwaves through Caesar's legions, proving that the Gauls could stand against Rome. But the siege of Alesia was different. The Romans, with their unmatched engineering, built not one but two rings of fortifications, one to keep Vercingetorix's forces in, and another to repel any reinforcements. Food supplies dwindled, hope waned. The relief army he had counted on to break the siege was delayed, its fate uncertain. In this moment, Vercingetorix made his fateful choice. He surrendered. Draped in his armor, he rode out to meet Caesar, throwing his weapons at the conqueror's feet. His hope that this act of submission might spare his people's suffering was a tragic miscalculation. The Gauls were subjugated, and Vercingetorix was taken to Rome, paraded as a trophy in Caesar's triumph before being executed. What if Vercingetorix had held out just a little longer? Could the relief army have broken through? Could his defiance have inspired further resistance? The tragedy of Vercingetorix is that we'll never know. His story reminds us that surrender is rarely the end of suffering. It is often the start of a new kind of loss. Croesus, the fall of the Golden Kingdom. The sun sets over Sardis, the golden capital of Lydia, its wealth the stuff of legend. Croesus, the kingdom's ruler, surveys his domain, his confidence as unshakable as the city's walls, known for his vast riches, so much that the phrase, "as rich as Croesus," still echoes today. He had grown accustomed to success, but wealth breeds complacency, and complacency blinds. When the Persian king Cyrus the Great began his campaign of conquest, Croesus underestimated the threat. He challenged Cyrus in battle, relying on his strong army and fortified capital. The initial encounter was inconclusive, but Croesus assumed he had time on his side. He retreated to Sardis, planning to regroup and call for reinforcements. But Cyrus was relentless. He pursued Croesus with a speed that defied expectations, breaching the city's defenses with cunning and determination. Here, Croesus made his critical error. Instead of rallying his remaining forces for a last stand, he surrendered, believing resistance was futile. His kingdom fell, and Croesus was captured, his life spared only by a twist of fate, when Cyrus reportedly intervened at the last moment to save him from execution. Croesus's downfall wasn't just a military defeat. It was the collapse of a mindset. His overconfidence, followed by his loss of faith when it mattered most, cost him everything. His story warns us that surrender often stems not from weakness, but from a failure to adapt and persevere in the face of changing circumstances. Mithridates VI, the king who fled instead of fighting. Farther east, in the rugged mountains of Pontus, a defiant king waged a relentless war against Rome. For decades, Mithridates VI, known as the Poison King for his knowledge of toxins, resisted Rome's expansion into Asia Minor. His cunning, resourcefulness, and sheer determination earned him a reputation as one of Rome's most persistent enemies. Mithridates fought not one, but 3 wars against the Romans, each time clawing his way back from defeat. He was a master of resilience, retreating to regroup, and striking back when the time was right. But even the strongest resolve can falter, and in his final conflict against Pompey the Great, in 63 BCE, Mithridates' luck ran out. His forces were scattered, his allies turned against him, and his strongholds fell one by one. Faced with overwhelming odds, Mithridates made a decision that sealed his fate. He fled. Instead of making a final stand, he retreated farther into isolation, hoping to rebuild his power. But the isolation only deepened his despair. Abandoned and hunted, Mithridates took his own life rather than be captured by Rome. Mithridates' story is a poignant reminder that even the fiercest fighters can be undone by losing faith in their ability to recover. His flight wasn't just a physical retreat. It was a surrender of the spirit. The king who had resisted Rome for so long succumbed not to Roman swords, but to the weight of his own despair. What unites these 3 stories is the devastating impact of surrendering to despair. Vercingetorix, Croesus, and Mithridates each faced moments where hope could have been their greatest weapon. Instead, they allowed fear, exhaustion, or overconfidence to cloud their judgment. Their decisions to give up didn't just cost them their lives or kingdoms. They left legacies of what could have been, but their stories also reveal something deeper. Hope isn't just about optimism. It's about the will to fight, to adapt, and to persevere when everything seems lost. It's about holding the line, not because victory is guaranteed, but because surrender guarantees defeat. Why holding the line matters. For us, these stories aren't just historical curiosities. They're guideposts. We face battles of our own every day, whether it's a personal struggle, a professional challenge, or a moment of self-doubt. The temptation to give up, to retreat into comfort or resignation, is always there. But history shows us that the cost of surrender is far greater than the cost of perseverance. Imagine standing in Vercingetorix's place, surrounded by enemies, knowing that surrender might spare you, but doom your people. Imagine being Croesus, watching the gates of Sardis fall, wondering if your overconfidence led you here. Imagine being Mithridates, the mountains echoing with the silence of your scattered allies, the weight of defeat pressing down. What would you do? Would you give in, or would you hold the line? If there's one thing to take from these stories, it's that hope isn't a feeling, it's a choice. It's the decision to stand firm, to fight for what matters, even when the odds seem impossible. The commanders who held on to hope, who adapted and persevered, left legacies of triumph. Those who surrendered left only questions of what might have been. In your own life, you will face moments where the pressure feels insurmountable. In those moments, remember Vercingetorix, Croesus, and Mithridates, not as failures, but as reminders of what happens when hope is lost. And then choose differently. Hold the line. Fight the battle, because the steepest price is always paid by those who surrender before the fight is over.